I think the majority of my requests were Sega Genesis games. It's a very popular system on this channel. If you ask most gamers what their favorite beat-em-ups are, chances are Streets of Rage 2 shows up on that list. 2 is the apex of the whole franchise, a massive leap from the first game, larger and more detailed sprites, more satisfying gameplay, and a roster of characters that offers more unique fighting styles, instead of the just the same fighter but weaker or stronger. Topping the first game would be no easy task, but Ancient pulled it off in the end. Ancient was a developer that had gained Sega's trust over the years with their Master System Sonic the Hedgehog, and the success that followed Streets of Rage 2. It was a company founded by Yuzo Koshiro and his mom Tomo Koshiro. Tomo was an expert pianist. She taught her son Yuzo how to play when he was 3 years old, and by the time he was in high school, he was composing music for the PC-8801. He worked at Falcom with his sister, Ayano Koshiro. She was the graphic designer for the monsters in the Yeast games while Yuzo worked on the music. The Koshiro siblings left Falcom and began working at Ancient. They both worked together on games like ActRaiser 2, Beyond Oasis, and of course, Streets of Rage 2. Ayano did the graphics, and Yuzo did the music, with some help from Motohiro Kawashima for Rage 2. After the release of Rage 2, the small development team was met with the daunting task of trying to create near perfection yet again. This time without Ayano Koshiro on graphic detail. A bunch of new faces would do the artwork, and I still think they did a pretty good job this time. Ayano claimed that she was just left in the dark by the higher-ups, while her brother returned to the series. In my opinion, that's like taking Michael Jordan out of the Chicago Bulls. Did you know that she was a graphic designer for Terranigma? She was a brilliant artist, and after playing some of the games she worked on, I have tons of respect for Ayano and her brother as well. And a third sibling they keep chained up in the attic and feed buckets of fish heads to. We're not supposed to talk about him, but I digress. Anyway, Streets of Rage 3. I settled on playing the Japanese version, also known as Bare Knuckle 3. The Japanese version is canon to the fourth game as far as I know, so we'll stick with that one. And there are a bunch of differences between this and the version we got in North America. The most glaring one is the plot of the game being entirely rewritten. In Bare Knuckle 3, a Rakushin bomb kills 30,000 and injures 80,000 in a test run by the Syndicate. The Syndicate kidnaps a high-profile general, Ivan Petrov, and plans on starting a global war in the Lima regions with an imposter in his place, played by Shiva, because he's this master of disguise apparently. By selling their doomsday weapons to the highest bidder, the Syndicate is willing to start a global disaster for profit, turning a political powder keg into a mushroom cloud. Dr. Gilbert Zan, the cyborg scientist who discovered the Rakushin chemical that's being used by the Syndicate, defects from the Syndicate and joins Axel and Blaze to stop Mr. X's evil plans. And Skate is here too, because Adam Hunter is busy. It's like he never has time for us anymore. Things are a bit different in the North American version. The whole intro that starts before the game is now gone, as the story was drastically altered. Now we have a plot about the Syndicate swapping the chief of police and other high-ranking government officials with robots to carry out their schemes. Rakushin does not exist, and neither does General Ivan. Instead, we get a bunch of normal bombs placed around the city as a means to distract the police. But the region differences do not stop there. Dialogue had to be rewritten. Female enemy designs were altered. You have different colored clothes for some reason. The White House is now City Hall. Names of the enemies were changed. And there was this one boss you fight in the first level. They removed him from Rage 3. Yeah, I don't see a problem here at all. The 90s were a simpler time. This is Ash, by the way, an absolutely fabulous and totally not offensive homosexual stereotype. If you hold the A button immediately after you beat him, you can play as Ash, but only after you get a game over. If you hold B and start immediately after you beat Shiva, you get the keys to the Ferrari. Let's just say that the Shiva redemption arc starts here. Shiva Mania is running wild.
Final crash!
In Rage 3, Shiva's missing a bunch of his tools. He doesn't have his overhead kick. He has no blitz attack. His special doesn't hit enemies behind him. He doesn't have a forward special. No back or forward throws. And he can't throw enemies into each other. It's like Shiva's still in beta development. Or maybe the 24 megabit cartridge met its limit and cuts had to be made. Same with Ash. He has a powerful moveset, and he is one of the fastest characters in the game, but he's still missing some moves too. His forward and back throws are just taunts. You have to press up or down to dunk people. Ash and Shiva feel unfinished, but being unfinished doesn't stop Shiva from being the fucking man though. He can still clear waves of enemies fast, and his final crash can devastate tougher enemies and bosses. And you get him as early as level 1. That's right, the penultimate boss from the last game, Mr. X's right-hand man. The first fucking boss? What the hell is the rest of the game like? Since Shiva isn't the main character, as much as I would want that to be a reality, I should go over the main 4. Axel is just Axel, the all-around balanced fighter. What he may lack in speed, he makes up for in power. This time his grand upper got nerfed hard. It's weak as hell now. It does next to nothing in terms of damage at first, but with the star system in place, his grand upper can clear more ground and do more damage. These stars show up after you rack up 40,000 points, but you lose one if you die. And if you die before you reach 40k, you need to get 40k more points for a star. Blaze is faster and more technical. She may not be as strong as Axel, but her forward special has more reach, and her blitz is one of the best in the game. If you feel Axel is too stiff, Blaze might be the better option. Skate, or Sammy, is the weakest of the roster, but his small height lets him duck under projectiles when he dashes. His mobility is his strength, with a back grab that humiliates enemies. Skate can be deadly in the right hands, especially his blitz move. The rolling is stupid useful. Who do you think would win? A notorious criminal syndicate with ninjas, robots, and WMDs at its disposal? Or some kid on roller skates? Skate is so fucking strong that he's the only character who can throw the fatter enemies. Axel can't throw them. Blaze can't throw them. Zan, with his superior robot body, can't throw them. Not to brag, but my boy Shiva can suplex the fatties. The true final boss of Streets of Rage. And then there's the main event. The most important character to be introduced in Rage 3. Rue. Rue is awesome. You unlock him with the cheat code and you can pick him right at the select screen. His owner is a huge asshole though. His fight can be a problem because of both the kangaroo and the trainer. If you can kill the trainer first, the kangaroo just leaves. Otherwise you'll have to fight both of them. I think I've covered the whole roster. All the main characters that are crucial to the main story, so I think we can move on from here. Fine, I'll talk about Zan. Dr. Gilbert Zan makes his debut in Streets of Rage 3. Max is too busy jobbing to the Bushwhackers at SummerSlam. And Adam? God only knows where he is. Probably getting his dumbass kidnapped again. Zan is a pretty unique character. He has the most balanced stats overall, but his reach is second to none. He can zone enemies very easily, and his neutral special makes dropkicking him a huge mistake. I also like his electric tickle move. Reminds me of Phantom Limb from the Venture Bros. Great for groups of enemies and does some nice damage too. And his leveled up blitz move is nutty. Why does he need the gang's help again? He seems to be doing just fine by himself. His main gimmick is that he can't use items. He can't swing a bat or stab anyone. Instead, he makes a glowing ball of energy and goes bowling with his human pins. So what about the gameplay in 3? If I'm being honest, it blows the last 2 games out of the water. The first one was a simple beat 'em up. No bells or whistles. Just punch whatever's in front of you. And if you were good enough, you can stun lock enemies and kick their defenseless asses. 2 was a much more refined game. Blitz moves and special attacks were added. The frame rate was a solid 60 instead of 30. Everything was an improvement. Yet you still had punch loops. And I do miss calling for backup with a rocket launcher that lights up the whole street. 3 improves the gameplay even further, and they got rid of the punch loops. Or maybe they didn't. Special attacks don't drain your health as long as the blue meter is full. Blitz attacks get leveled up the more you play. You can roll vertically and run. Skate was the only character that could run in the last game. Everything is much faster. This game is on crack compared to 2. It's like playing Street Fighter 2 and going straight into turbo. One thing I do have gripes with is the actual impact of your attacks. Because it happens so fast, it doesn't have the same feel anymore. It doesn't have the same crunch as the previous game either. 2 sounds like every bone in your body is being shattered at the same time. 3 sounds like someone's getting smacked by a rolled up newspaper. I also want to talk more about the audio samples. The voice samples in particular. While a bunch of them are just reused from 2, The English versions, they suck.
Bare Knuckle.
They even replaced my boy's Final Crash.
Final Crash.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
And I'm not too keen on every single enemy making the same sound when they die, especially when they make that sound back to back to back.
Mock. Ing. Bird. Yeah.
You're gonna hear this scream a lot, because there are more Syndicate members you fight in this game than there are colored bananas in Donkey Kong 64. Why they felt the need to replace a soundbite I didn't think needed to be replaced is beyond me. And the levels are hit or miss for me. There are some good backdrops here and there, and level 5 has secret passageways with gold and fresh poultry, and some levels have stage hazards that annoy the shit out of me. Stage 2 has you going through the Atlas nightclub, but I think a more fitting name is the Seizure Room. Sega does not give a fuck about your epilepsy. The lights keep going out and I lose track of where everyone is. It sucks here. Stage 3 has wind, just like my favorite F-Zero track. But it also has these drums you can abuse and smack enemies with. Also, this is the bulldozer level. Instead of just moving to the side like a human with a functioning cerebral cortex, you punch through these walls instead. And sometimes the dozer. Cause everybody knows punching a bulldozer is the only way to actually stop one of these things. Stage 4 has this shit that writes these railroad tracks and constantly hits you and the enemies. Whichever developer thought this was fun deserves a Stage 4 Ligma diagnosis. Don't ask what Ligma is. And the less said about the robot factory, the better. If the streets were full of rage before, they are absolutely pissed off now. The difficulty was also changed to be much harder in America. I'm seeing more and more instances of Japanese games being easier than their American counterparts. Has it always been like this? Normal mode in Bear 3 is easy mode in Rage 3. Japanese hard would be the American normal, and so on. And for a game that made Shiva the first boss, that's not a very good sign. The easy mode in the American version won't let you get past level 5 without a bad ending. Stages are just waves and waves of enemies. 4 to 5 enemies on screen at any given time. All the familiar enemies are back, with a bunch of new ones as well. More shirtless karate people. These girls that constantly dropkick you from a mile away. Sometimes they leap to their death. It amuses me. More robots, and a bunch of agents. Almost forgot about the Goldies that constantly block, and the Zacks that always get the grab on you. Even when I am certain that I grabbed him, he always wins. And that bulldozer. And while the enemies stayed the same between regions for the most part, normal was much tougher because of the difficulty changes. The enemy AI is much more aggressive and they move faster than crack fiends, and they give more health to the bosses as well. And since your character, regardless of who you pick, does very little damage, these fights take forever. Some of them can have 3 health bars, and these bastards never stand still. It's like trying to catch the greased up deaf guy. It might be actually easier to catch the greased up deaf guy now that I think about it. They constantly go off screen, sometimes getting a cheap shot on you. You think the wave you just killed was the last one, then 5 more enemies, even tougher than the last wave, show up to ruin your day. It never ends. And this time they can steal your food. Mr. X is planning on profiting off a nuclear holocaust. Yet this is the most evil thing a member of the Syndicate has ever done.
I am shocked and appalled.
While this game is just non-stop survival mode with you being locked in a room full of enemies until the game decides it's time for you to leave, so you can go into another room and repeat the same process while getting your ass kicked again, the bosses were fine. For the most part. Mona and Lisa were pains in the asses to catch up to, but I wouldn't call them hard. They just never stay still. The jetpack guy, however, was a bastard. He's a cheap asshole with his fire thrust and his buddies getting in the way. You spend most of the time waiting for him to come down so you can hit him. Just wait for your moment to strike and don't get too close to him. He'll drop you harder than Adidas dropped Kanye. The robot controlled by Dr. Dom? What the hell is this? This is pathetic. Look out, he's gonna come down and hit you with this very obvious attack. This boss sucks. It would be harder to fuck up this fight than it is to fight this stupid thing. And you wanna know where in the game this joke of a boss fight is? You fight him in the last level, just before the final boss. Shiva got demoted and replaced by some shitty crane game. Speaking of Shiva, he's the first boss and the final boss of the "You killed General Ivan, you bastards" route. Shiva as an introductory boss is still all kinds of fucked up, but he can still be abused by jump kicks. He's still the same Shiva we all know and love, yet he's a bit more manageable than his previous iteration. Break, the robot Axel, is just fighting Axel in duel mode, except he cheats. The Yamato fight is my favorite fight in the whole game. 1 ninja, 2 clones. Sure, you have to essentially fight the same guy 3 times, but he does all kinds of cool shit. Jumping slashes, teleportation, and clone attacks. He even goes invisible during the fight. Sometimes he tries to be a dick and does an off-screen attack. And on harder difficulties, or the American normal, this fight can go on forever. 6 health bars on normal combined. That is absurd. And his theme is supposed to be some kind of remix of the first level in Revenge of Shinobi. He's the only boss in the game that gets his own music, aside from the Robot X. Robot X dances around, sucker punches you, shoots his gun, and some homing missiles. That kinda suck. He's more annoying than anything. You can't even grab him because he does a Zanflex. I will admit his robot portrait looks like he's doing the Nicolas Cage meme face, and I can't unsee it. X had way more charisma as a robot than he ever did as a human. While I did find most of the bosses to be the worst game of tag I've ever played, they pale in comparison to the final boss. The Syndicate is getting phased out. No wonder Shiva quit after 3. You get to fight yet another robot. Instead of having an awesome fight with the brain of Mr. X turning into a cybernetic dinosaur. When you start adding this weird shit into your game, all bets are off. Just go the full Shinobi 3 route and put the craziest shit you can think of in your game. As a counter to how stupid this shit actually is. The Robot Y, or Neo X, is the most annoying boss in the game. Flies all over the place. Ignores your combos. He can also do a Hurricane Rana. Because that's what I look for when I'm shopping for genocidal robots. This is also the fight that comes with the 3-minute timer, which doesn't seem so bad at first. But when you bump up the difficulty, this bastard has 7 health bars. 7. Get the fuck out of here. At this point, what's stopping me from just walking up to the fish tank formerly known as Mr. X and doing this? I do have a secret technique for this, just in case I had to fight a robot with the fate of the world on my shoulders. You get what you paid for, dumbass. Streets of Rage 3 comes with multiple endings. I remember that the first game had 2 endings. A good one, and a second one where you take over the Syndicate after you beat Mr. X and your buddy. In Rage 3, there's one for beating the game on easy, there's an ending that depends on if you save General Petrov or not in level 6, and there's endings that depend on whether or not you beat the final boss before this timer runs out. And that's Mr. X in the background. He died after the second game, but who knew that his crime syndicate had medical and scientific research that was decades ahead of our own. I do love that in the English version of 3, he begs for help. Like the heroes are gonna go out of their way to help him after all the shit he's done. There's a lot of weird lines of dialogue in the North American 3. This one where you save the chief of police, and he says that he's glad that Blaze is still in shape. He's just asking for the Me Too movement to cancel him, or the chief of police not knowing why he was kidnapped. But if you fail to save him, he tells you exactly why he was kidnapped. Or when Mr. X calls Axel, handsome one. Why? The good ending is saving General Ivan, then beating Mr. X's robot before the timer runs out. Saving Ivan can seem stressful at first, even when you have less time on the harder modes. If time does run out, the poison is released in the building. Ivan won't die right away, but he will lose health over time. And so will you. How do you cure poison? With an apple, of course. And just for the hell of it, I stood back and watched Ivan die. He would have survived if I gave him my apple. It does keep the doctor away after all. The way you save him is by deactivating this barrier on the middle floor. There's only 3 floors. The lower 2 floors have these machines you need to destroy while enemies try to stop you. Time stops in these rooms, so there's no rush. But you may waste time trying to find them. There are 3 rooms on each floor, and if you don't know which room to go to, you have a 1 in 3 chance of finding the right room. And the doors lock when you exit a room, and the only way to open them is to kill these enemies in the hallway. And you have to do this every time to enter a room. If you saved Ivan but ran out of time during the final fight, the bombs that Mr. X planted all over the Lima regions goes off and causes an untold number of casualties. The soundtrack to SOR 3 has been a point of contention to a lot of fans. We cannot talk about Rage 3 without bringing up the music. Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima have gone deep into the EDM rabbit hole. House, techno, and some genre called gabber would be the inspiration for 3's soundtrack. Kawashima had already proven himself with his contribution to Rage 2, Expander. It also happens to be one of my favorites in the whole game. And Kawashima would join forces with Koshiro once again for the 3rd game, alongside Hideki Akira Koyama as sound programmer. Now I have to ask you a serious question. Where do you go after you had just written the music for Streets of Rage 2? How can you possibly top that? It's not just one of the best soundtracks on the Genesis, or beat-em-up games. It's one of the best gaming soundtracks of all time. Somehow, Koshiro had topped the first game, which used to be his best work, but making a better soundtrack than 2 is extremely daunting, maybe even impossible. So a new approach was discovered, and 3's soundtrack would be experimental to say the least. Melody, harmony, bass lines, rhythms. The Koshiro Kawashima duo would take these concepts and just toss them out the window. To a lot of gamers, force-feeding laxatives to an elephant while another person holds a microphone right up to its ass would make better music than 3's soundtrack. I can't exactly recommend this soundtrack either. It's acquired taste at best. When you encounter Mr. X and you can't believe that he's still alive after the second game, the music that plays sounds like someone let a cat walk across a keyboard. The music that plays during the fight, it sounds like the keyboard cat invited some friends. It revels in its atonality. The aggressive beats and repetitive sequences become a tangled mess of digitized sounds, almost soulless. If we are talking about the soundtrack in relation to Rage 3's settings and themes, then the soundtrack is absolutely fitting. A recognizable living being with a mechanical exoskeleton inside, pretending to be an organic human. And given that half the shit you fight in this game are robots, it does a great job of setting the tone. Rage 2 didn't have robots until the last few levels. 3 is just full of them. Mr. X has more Terminators than Skynet. You even fight a robot clone of Axel. There's always this feeling that something is very wrong, almost corrupted in a way, as if the human element is gone. No more amusement parks and baseball stadiums. No more stories about vigilantes saving the town from crime bosses and gangs. The stakes are much higher this time. We have to stop World War III, or stop the robots from taking the place of high-profile politicians, depending on what version you play. It's like if robots have taken over the game's production, and the music was AI generated. And that's not entirely wrong, but a lot of the pitches and sequences were mostly randomized. It's like Koshiro played cow bingo, and wherever on the board the cow took a shit, that was the next note. Actually, he put some random numbers in a music compiler, and that was the gist of it. Not as exciting as cow bingo, but the results are the same. And from a technical aspect, the soundtrack is one of the most impressive things the Genesis has ever done. The 2612 is working triple overtime to make this music possible. It's unlike anything I've ever heard the Genesis do. This has to be one of the most hardware-pushing soundtracks in existence. It might not be the most tolerable thing to listen to, but you have to admit that what's going on under the hood is something only a few Genesis developers could ever get close to replicating, considering that there are Genesis games that sound like this. The Koshiro Kawashima duo sought to make something different, to test the limits of the hardware and their compositional skills. I have to respect them for that. And there are some legit bangers here. Fuse, the boss theme, Shinobi Reverse, but for every banger, there's at least one dud. It's weird how the second Streets of Rage is universally praised as one of the best beat-em-ups ever made, and the next game would be a completely different story, treated like a black sheep of the entire series in some way. Streets of Rage 3 has been viewed as a disappointment. That mostly stems from the fact that 2 was just a very hard game to follow. The expectations were maybe too high. While there are still parts of this game that I think are way better here than in the last 2 games, it has its share of issues. The localization is one of the worst I have ever seen. The attacks feel weaker, the music is questionable at times. And going from a story about inner-city criminals to international conflicts with WMDs, robots, and brains in jars was a jarring leap to say the least. I played a lot of games with brains in jars recently. I don't know why this is so popular. I had to watch an episode of Super Rescue Soul Brain for that Shatterhand video, and the first episode has a fucking brain in a jar too. If you think Streets of Rage 3 is really that bad, then you haven't played the Master System versions. And I would put the blame squarely on Sega of America for all of Rage 3's shortcomings. Sega wasn't the smartest company in the world. When it came to hardware and software, Sega were years ahead of their competition. When it came to marketing, they were Patrick Star levels of stupid. There were a bunch of expensive Genesis add-ons that all failed. The Saturn's marketing was a clusterfuck. EA was robbing them blind, and God only knows how much money this company actually lost because of their backwards decisions. Patrick Star probably could have done a better job if he was Sega's president. There were plans to bring Streets of Rage into the next console generation, but unfortunately, none of those projects saw the light of day. Streets of Rage was no small, flash-in-a-pan game. It was a huge hit for Sega. It had the potential to rival Sonic, and they chose not to pursue what could have been one of their most successful IPs. Again, Sega is stupid. Somehow along the way, Streets of Rage disappeared off the face of the earth. We didn't see it for over 2 decades until the 4th game came out in 2020. If you truly want that definitive Streets of Rage experience, the 4th game is sublime. A great combo system, tons and tons of content, and a survival mode that is beyond addictive. And your boy even got the Platinum Trophy in that one. Even if the Genesis trilogy is playable on a bunch of Sega compilations and Nintendo's eShop, fans were begging for a new installment, to revisit the streets once more. But time and time again, Sega had no plans for Axel and friends to fight petty thugs. And after years and years of waiting, the fans said, fuck it. We'll make our own game. With blackjack and hookers, of course.